Treasure held on to that 16-bit tech for a good while, but it's pretty obvious that they got everything they wanted out of it with Alien Soldier. While Treasure decided to spend $19.95 giving their swan songs to the Genesis, the entire time they were also working on Sega's next generation hardware to bring us some 32-bit Saturn goodness. More power, more colors, more sprites, more frames, and most importantly, CD technology. Rather than building on their previous slate of run-and-gun 2D action games, the first game of Treasure's next generation would instead evolve upon Yu Yu Hakusho's systems. But rather than being a fighting game, we got one of the most unique and deep beat-em-ups on the Saturn in Guardian Heroes. But just for clarification, we're going to be talking about the Xbox 360 version of the game. Guardian Heroes takes the multi-lane, multi-directional fighting system of Yu Yu Hakusho and puts it in a much larger plane with big stages filled with several opponents at once. We've got 3 planes instead of just 2 now, and the 11-character roster of Yu Yu Hakusho has been replaced by a massive 45-character selection. Although, the way most of these characters work is rather unique. Guardian Heroes is split into a cooperative story mode and a competitive versus mode. The standard story mode only has support for up to 2-player co-op, but with versus you can go up to 6 or 12 players depending on the version of the game. In the story mode there are 5 main playable characters, although only 4 of them are available at the start. These are the characters with the most work put into them as far as a cohesive and complete moveset goes, but pretty much every single enemy in the game is also playable as part of the versus mode. This does mean the roster is incredibly unbalanced. But who doesn't want to try playing as a tiny mouse against the messenger of God? One of the main draws of the story mode is the addition of RPG mechanics and choice in how you progress. As you defeat enemies, you'll gain experience points which can then be put into different stats as you level up. You can try making a number of different builds to customize each character to your taste. Along with that, there's also tons of different routes you can take during the story mode. This is a pretty great addition because Guardian Heroes is easily the shortest Treasure game yet, even taking reading the dialogue scenes into account. But with 30 levels and 7 different endings alongside unlocking most of the aforementioned characters, there's plenty of reason to replay the game. It kinda surprises me that this wasn't also made into an arcade game, since this feels like it'd be perfect as one. The Saturn version even has one of its options labeled as dip switch settings, implying this might have been intended to also be in arcades? I don't know. Of course, if you're gonna play Guardian Heroes, you should probably know what you're getting into. So what about those main characters? The main 4, I guess 6 characters make up a fairly typical RPG party. You got Han, he's the big buff physical tank himbo of the group. Not particularly smart, but he deals tons of physical damage and has the most health by default of anyone in the group. Unfortunately, this also makes him very slow, but his standard attacks at least have a wide range. Randy is the party's reluctant straight man defensive mage. He's weak physically, but his speedy attacks can combo very easily, and his magic spells have a huge area of effect and are particularly devastating against large groups of enemies. He's definitely one of the better characters to play if you're going solo. Genjiro is the thief/ninja of the group who always makes very odd comparisons as a weird old man. He's fast, he can teleport and shit, but he's not as strong or durable as Han. He does have pretty great lightning magic though, so he might be a better all-rounder for you if you don't like Han's sluggishness. Nicole is the group's healer and wants her goddamn food. She has an odd moveset and she has some fairly decent and long-range normal attacks alongside powerful magic spells, but luck is a much bigger factor in her skills compared to the rest of the party, as her best spell's effect is dependent on your luck stat. She can also just randomly trip in the middle of running, so I guess we know where Sakurai got that idea from.
I'm in touch with this character right now.
The final playable character of the party is Serena, a rogue knight captain who basically pulls everyone into this wild adventure. She's an unlockable party member, but I believe you need to finish the game in normal mode to play as her first. She's in between Han and Genjiro as far as physical combat goes, but rocks some magic spells, so she is technically the most well-rounded character of the bunch. However, this does make it more difficult to decide where to allocate stat points, so that could be a limiting factor. Guardian Heroes is just as difficult as its previous Treasure brethren, but thankfully, even if you're playing alone, you'll always have someone by your side. About 5 minutes into the game, you'll encounter the Undead Warrior, who you will be able to command as he assists you throughout your adventure. He's an incredibly powerful and useful ally, but enemies defeated by him won't give you any EXP, so you'll have to be careful not to abuse him too much or else you'll be left in the cold. It's pretty nice having an AI party member in a beat 'em up, which does make Guardian Heroes much more fun in single player, alongside the improved mechanics brought from Yu Yu Hakusho. There's plenty of other fun characters too. This is Treasure's first real attempt at trying to tell an actual story with lore and stuff throughout the entire game. And at least in the HD version of the game, they do a pretty good job. This is something we'll discuss more as we get into Treasure's other games, but Guardian Heroes treads a very fine line between not taking itself seriously at all, and then going all in on the deep lore content. The first scene has our main party already accomplished their quest of finding a legendary sword and are kind of just sitting around wondering what to do with it, until Saren breaks into their hotel room and tells them the Empire is coming for them. They run away to find an invincible mech before the sword flies out of Han's hands and resurrects the undead warrior, and they proceed to fight against the Empire. And somewhere in the middle of this we learn the world is divided between the three races of humans, Skyborn, and Earthbloods, which means you get to visit both heaven and hell and rain down chaos in both. Yeah, it gets pretty crazy, especially if you remember their average run of this game is only like an hour long. There's even a route where you get to fight the final boss of Gunstar Heroes, Gold Silver. The story sounds about as stupid as something a child would come up with for an epic fantasy story, or a wacky D&D campaign, but the way most of the dialogue is written just makes it incredibly endearing. Guardian Heroes is essentially the brainchild of Han, or as he's known in real life,
Tatsuhiko Kikuchi.
He's the main character designer in a lot of Treasure's most iconic games, and in Guardian Heroes he took the role of the game's creative and action director. We should remember that Treasure loves to give themselves rather unique titles for positions in their company, but you can definitely tell there was a lot of passion put into Guardian Heroes with how much work and content got put into it. The sprites look especially great, on par with Capcom's work in some of their contemporary fighting games like the Street Fighter Alpha series and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. They aren't animated quite as fluidly, but it has a feel similar to the sprites in Arc System Works' 2D fighters. Treasure could have immediately tried to make a 3D game, but they stuck with what they already knew since they believed 2D and 3D games could coexist. And they were right! Rather than using the Saturn to attempt to provide some fancy models, they used the 3D to give extra depth into the environments, making the transitioning between the multiple layers extra smooth. But I can't really talk about Guardian Heroes' presentation without bringing up easily the best part of the entire game. With the transition from the limited sound hardware of the Genesis to Saturn CDs, let's just say Treasure took full advantage of the extra storage to give us one of the best soundtracks they would ever make. You could even choose which song to play in the Versus mode, so let's take a look. Roundabout. Saxophone, oh god, oh fuck. Whenever game's OST pulls out the sax and goes all out, that's the good shit. Rough and Ready is one of the best pieces in the game. It's super 90s as fuck, but so is his whole soundtrack. That special kind of 90s rock used in games like this, the early Ys games, and the CD Castlevanias is something else. Some of these titles are also great, like one theme is literally just called The Plot. There's also Complex Soldiers, Fighters of Pain, which is certainly a title for a colorful game like this. Shuffle in the Dark makes me want to shuffle in the dark, holy fuck! This jazz is just supreme. We got Jazzy Sabotage. What the fuck? Open your heart. Dude, I love Sonic. Yeah! Oh, wait. Never mind. This is good too, though. I know this feature was only added in the HD version of the game after a bunch of other fighters had similar options to select music for fights, but it's still really cool. Just playing a game, looking for the best music for the upcoming battle, or exploring an OST for the first time and seeing the fun titles like Must Die. That turns out to be the most epic shit. The OST is just the cream of the crop. It's gonna be hard for any future Treasure games to top this. Maybe. I think Guardian Heroes is a fairly great game, but even though I have been pretty positive while talking about it, I don't really think I've enjoyed it as much as I wanted to going into it. The presentation is so good, the music's outstanding, and the writing is chock full of classic lines, but At the same time, I'm just not really the biggest fan of the beat 'em up gameplay. Even though it's a big improvement over Yu Yu Hakusho with it being way easier to combo hits now, I also just feel like I get hit randomly way more often as a result of the larger number of enemies. There is a block button, but it also interrupts my ability to attack and do some of the more complex motion inputs in the game. Some attacks have great impact, but others have these long recoveries and don't deal as much damage as I'd like, especially if it just pushes the enemy away. I'm sure this won't be as much of a problem for people who do really like the genre though. If you like classic beat-em ups and haven't played Guardian Heroes yet, you totally should. The Xbox 360 version is definitely the one to go for, as it's like $5 and includes plenty of extra content over the Saturn version, including online multiplayer and more rule sets for the multiplayer modes. It's also got this remix mode that attempts to improve the graphics and changes up the mechanics by adding an extra attack button, among other features.
No response, but hey, you're ready back to back!
It's also backwards compatible on Xbox One, so that's also an option if you're so inclined. I do wish Treasure would release this port on other platforms like Steam, Switch, or just PlayStation. It's just incredibly odd that of all the consoles to make great HD ports of their old games, they chose 360. Then again, there are quite a bit of odd Japanese Xbox exclusives, so I guess I can't say that it's unusual, but man, it really needs to be more widely available. And trust me, this won't be the first time I'm going to bring this up. Anyway, I think that's enough with Guardian Heroes. We have one of Treasure's bigger cult classics up next.